The wet season sky split open, dumping torrential rain over the Kimberley. Dry creek beds transformed overnight into thundering brown torrents, and great rivers like the Fitzroy and Ord swelled and roared across the red earth. In the long, dry months that followed, those same rivers shrank back to gentle streams, trickling between wide sandbars and billabongs teeming with bird life. For millennia, this cycle of flood and drought ruled the remote Kimberley region of Western Australia. The indigenous peoples of this land understood these rhythms. They gave the Fitzroy a sacred name, Matawarra. To them, these rivers were living ancestors, not just water to be used. But to others far away in Australia's crowded southern cities, the sight of so much water flowing unused into the Timor Sea seemed like an opportunity. It was the mid-20th century, an era of grand nation-building dreams, and an audacious idea was taking root: tame these wild northern rivers and turn the Kimberley into a fertile food bowl. This is the story of the wild plan to flood northern Australia. In dusty government offices and optimistic boardrooms, men pored over maps of the empty north. They saw the vast plains around the Ord River and imagined them checkered with fields of cotton, rice and sugarcane. Since the 1940s, agricultural scientists had been toiling at a remote research station on the Ord, sweating under the brutal sun as they tested crops in the rusty red soil. Wartime fears and post-war ambition fed their mission. Australia's population was growing, and what better way to secure the nation's future than to unlock a new Eden in the tropics? Politicians and planners spoke in rousing tones of making the desert bloom. The Ord River, they declared, would no longer idly spill into the ocean each wet season. Instead, its waters would be captured and spread across the land, conjuring verdant farms from the Kimberley wilderness. A great dam must be built, they decided, an inland sea to feed an agricultural utopia. By the early 1960s, that grand vision leapt off the pages of reports and onto the ground at a place called Kununurra. Once a quiet stretch of bush by the Ord, Kununurra was surveyed and established as a brand new town in 1961, a living foothold for the coming irrigation scheme. Soon the scramble was on. Engineers in khaki shorts arrived with bulldozers and drills. Traditional owners looked on warily as roads and fences cut across country. In 1963, the first step of the plan was complete: the Ord River Diversion Dam. A concrete wall locking across the Ord's flow was officially opened with great fanfare. On a blistering July day, Australia's Prime Minister flew in for the ceremony, joining local leaders on a temporary stage by the dam. As the crowd fanned themselves under a tropical sun, the Prime Minister boomed that this new dam marked the dawn of a bright era. From this moment, he declared with palpable excitement, nobody will be able to look at this and say, what a pity it was never opened. Everything is now in order. Laughter rippled through the audience, soon drowned by applause as he cut the ribbon and the Ord Diversion Dam was pronounced open. The Ord River's water began backing up behind the barrier, forming a long blue reservoir they named Lake Kununurra. Faces beamed with pride and hope. Reporters called Kununurra the most exciting place in Australia at this moment, echoing the Prime Minister's own words. To the south, urban Australians saw newspaper photos of outback officials shaking hands and predicted that this remote country was on the verge of blooming into a new agricultural heartland. Real drama, however, was still yet to come. Further upstream at a narrow gorge in the Carboyd Ranges, work was beginning on the Ord's ultimate conquest, the Main Ord River Dam. This would be a big one, a towering rock-filled dam that would create one of the largest man-made lakes Australia had ever seen. Construction began in 1969, and the scale of it captured the nation's imagination. Dynamite blasts echoed through the ranges as tons of rock and earth were piled into a wall throttling the river. Hundreds of workers toiled in remote camps, often wakened before dawn by the whoop of curlews and the rumble of trucks. Aboriginal families who had lived and hunted along the Ord's bank for generations watched with concern as their beloved river was slowly sealed in a barrier of steel and stone. Kangaroos bounded away confused as their watering hole shrank, yet the project pressed on, unstoppable, fueled by the era's unshakable faith in engineering. Late in 1971, the last gap in the dam wall was plugged. The Ord River's flow slowed, then ceased, and began rising inexorably behind the dam. Trees and scrub on the valley floor were submerged. the Great Lake Argyle was being born. When the Main Ord River Dam was officially opened in 1972, a vast inland lake spread out through the Kimberley Hills, where there had once been a ribbon of river. Lake Argyle was staggering in size, eventually over 700 square kilometres, holding back the wet season fury in a placid blue expanse. It was so immense that locals joked it looked like an inland sea. It could drown the entire Sydney harbour more than a dozen times over. At the dam's opening ceremony, attended by another Prime Minister and throngs of dignitaries, there was triumphant talk of progress and prosperity. A small flotilla of boats bobbed on the new lake surface, ferrying officials who marvelled at the mirror-smooth water where once red dirt had baked in the sun. One old cattleman from the Argyle Downs station wiped a tear as he looked across the water. His homestead lay beneath that lake now, carefully relocated and rebuilt on higher ground, as a museum piece of pioneer history. For the politicians though, Lake Argyle was a shining symbol, the linchpin of the grand Ord Irrigation Scheme. Western Australia's leaders proclaimed that an agricultural revolution was underway, with unlimited water on tap from Lake Argyle. The surrounding plains were to become a patchwork of green farms, a northern agricultural utopia that would feed not just Australia, but perhaps Asia as well. Hopes ran high, investors were courted, and plans were drawn up for new mills and packing plants. The dream seemed within grasp. In those heady early years, the town of Kununurra boomed with optimism. New settlers, young families, adventurous farmers and engineers flocked north to claim a slice of the future. Under the harsh sun they planted cotton, rice and sorghum. On newly irrigated paddocks carved from scrub, green shoots emerged, and the air hummed with the promise of abundance. Government ministers and business magnates flew in for tours, posing for photographs in fields of trial crops. This is just the beginning, they promised. The first stage of 12,000 hectares of farms was already producing, and the next stage, 70,000 hectares or more, lay just ahead. The Ord scheme was hailed in newspapers as a bold stroke of nation building akin to the Great Snowy Mountains Hydro Scheme. School children were taught that science and human ingenuity had triumphed over the hostile outback. At night, from newly built farmhouses, one could sometimes hear the faint roar of water rushing through irrigation channels, a sound that lulled many to sleep, dreaming of wealth and plenty. But the Kimberley had challenges of its own, and it did not surrender easily to these dreams. Before long, reality began to bite. The same nature that had dazzled dam builders with monsoonal water turned out to be a fickle partner for farmers. Heavy rains and long droughts proved unsuitable for many crops. Rice paddies were flooded out one season and bone dry the next. The much-hyped cotton fields grew green and bushy, but when they flowered, clouds of voracious insects descended. Caterpillars and bollworms chewed through the cotton balls relentlessly. Farmers fought back with chemical sprays. The whine of crop-dusting planes became a common sunrise sound over Kununurra, and a chemical tang often hung in the still evening air. For a few years in the late 1960s, they battled the bugs and tried to coax a decent cotton harvest from the Ord's rich water. Yet, each season, the pests grew bolder and more resistant, and yields stayed disappointingly low. By the early 1970s, with world cotton prices slumping and fields blighted by insects, the cotton venture collapsed. The very crop that had justified the dam was abandoned. One by one, frustrated farmers walked off the land, dreams in ruins. Other crops were attempted. Sorghum fell to mildew, rice was outcompeted by ravenous birds and seasonal floods, and later even sugarcane had its brief day. A mill was built in the 1990s amid fresh hype, only to shut down when it proved unprofitable. The northern Eden that had been promised began to seem like a mirage. Alongside these economic woes came environmental and cultural wake-up calls. With the Ord River now harnessed, the ecology of the region changed in subtle and overt ways. Downstream of the dams, the natural flood cycles were altered. Wetlands that had depended on seasonal flows began to shrink, and invasive weeds found new opportunity in the stable year-round waters of the irrigation channels. Salt began creeping into the soil in some overwatered fields, a white crust that whispered of the salinity nightmares that had plagued other irrigation schemes. Scientists who had once rushed to dam the river started preaching caution. The land and water must be understood and respected, or the Kimberley would exact a price. Indeed, while Lake Argyle teemed with new life, huge flocks of waterbirds congregated on its shores, and freshwater crocodiles basked in its coves, the land around the farms suffered from disrupted patterns. As the 1980s and 1990s rolled on, the Grand Northern Vision inevitably shrank to fit reality. The second stage of the Ord Irrigation Scheme, once imagined to cover an area the size of a small European country, was repeatedly delayed and scaled back. Instead of 70,000 hectares of new farms, only a few thousand hectares were ever added, bit by bit. Government enthusiasm cooled when cost-benefit analysis showed meagre returns and mounting maintenance expenses. On the ground, the bustling construction camps gave way to a quieter rural community. Kununurra settled into a steadier rhythm, supported by a modest agricultural industry. Some melons, mangoes and sandalwood plantations did find success, and by tourism drawn to the spectacle of Lake Argyle and the region's natural beauty. The dream of a northern food bowl was not entirely dead. It would resurface every so often in political speeches, but it had certainly dimmed. There were no longer serious plans to dam every river or blanket the Kimberley and farmland. The wilderness, it turned out, had resisted in its own ways, through unforgiving climate, pests, isolation and the sheer resilience of its ancient culture and ecology. Nowhere was this retreat more evident than with the rivers that remained undammed. Chief among these was the mighty Fitzroy River to the west. During the giddy early Ord years, some had looked to the Fitzroy and other Kimberley rivers and mused, perhaps we'll build the next dam there. Indeed, in the 1990s, a bold proposal emerged to dam the Fitzroy at Diamond Gorge and pump its waters to irrigate giant cotton fields. But by this time the tide had turned. Environmental groups and Aboriginal traditional owners united in opposition. In mass meetings under the boab trees of Fitzroy Crossing, elders spoke passionately of the river's sacred role and the lessons learned from the Ord experience. Community organisers coined the rallying cry, "Let the Fitzroy flow free." Their voices carried weight. After years of protest and debate, the dam plans were shelved. The Fitzroy's wild flood pulses continued to thunder through its gorges each wet season, and come dry season, its broad riverbed again became a mosaic of calm pools reflecting the brilliant Kimberley sky. In time, the Fitzroy gained formal protection for its extraordinary natural and cultural values. Even the government acknowledged it should never be dammed. Similarly, talk of channeling Kimberley waters south to thirsty cities was met with public outrage and quickly abandoned. The grand conquest of the northern rivers had, in effect, run up against a new understanding that not all rivers are mere resources. Some are better left to run their ancient course. Today, an early morning mist rises from the waters of Lake Argyle, and the dam wall stands as a colossal monument to 20th century ambition. It still provides water for the pared-down farms of Kununurra, generates hydropower, and supports a small town that wouldn't exist without it. In that sense, the visionaries did carve out a piece of their dream, but at a fraction of the imagined scale, and at a great cost. In the Kimberley today, the wild beauty that once was seen as empty and in need of transformation is now increasingly treasured. The early dam builders' saga is remembered with a complex mix of admiration and regret. Admiration for their daring and ingenuity, and regret for the naivety that underlay the scheme. Their dream to command nature now stands tempered by a respectful wish to work with it. Visitors who journey to these far northern rivers find themselves humbled by the scale of the land and the knowledge that, in the end, the Kimberley remains more wild than tamed. The story of damming the rivers has become a cautionary tale that grand visions must reckon with ground truths. And so, as twilight falls over both Lake Argyle and the free-flowing Fitzroy, one cannot help but feel a deep awe. Awe for the grandiosity of the human ambition that tried to reshape this land, and for the enduring power of the land's own spirit, which, in subtle and profound ways, ultimately shaped the destiny of those great plans. I hope you found this as interesting as I did. And as always, thanks for watching. Before I end this video, I'd like to give a big shout out to my Patreon and YouTube members. Thank you so much to everyone that helps to support this channel.